Again, thanks to the UConn administration for allowing this event to go forward. I only wish that their safety protocols extended to allowing members of the general public to show up. I know I got dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of emails from people in the general area who were hoping to get in, were unable to do so. I had heard that by the time of this event, there were another 500 or 600 people who wanted to come at minimum, and it's unfortunate that the heckler's veto still seems to prevail. Anita Hill spoke here, I guess, in the last couple of weeks, and it was totally open to the public. Something has to be done about a system where a few crazed leftists decide they don't want to hear somebody speak, and therefore people from the outside who pay taxes to universities like this one can't get in. You know, that has to stop. This heckler's veto nonsense where if somebody on the left prevents speech, we all have to make sure that no one can get in from the outside. That really needs to end, particularly because free speech, I mean, this should be a shining moment for this university, not just because I'm so brilliant and I'm here, but also because it's a great thing that universities have people like me, and yes, like the person who's speaking opposite me on this campus, to give a variation of ideas. That's a wonderful thing, and it should be a shining example for universities around the country. It's just too bad that they won't share that with people in the community who are paying for it. So frankly, I'm always amazed a little bit by the amount of upset that my speeches cause. Apparently, I've heard that I'm a danger to the student body in some way, so much so that the university's Associate Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer, the most useless title in all of academia, sent a letter suggesting that students who feel threatened by my presence should reach out to the Cultural Center's, the Dean of Students' Office, or the university's Office of Counseling and Mental Health Services. So they actually sent a letter that said, quote, "We understand that even the thought of an individual coming to campus with the views that Mr. Shapiro expresses can be concerning and even hurtful." Wow. And that's why we wanted to make you aware as soon as we were informed. I mean, it's like a missile being launched from North Korea. We just have to put the alert system on Twitter. I agree, by the way. If you are so upset by my very presence on this campus, first of all, my guess is you didn't show up. Second of all, if you're that upset that you actually have to go to mental health services, I would just suggest that you probably need to see mental health services about a fair number of other things in your life. Speaking of which, of course, the college Democrats are holding an event simultaneously right now, which I'm sure has just the same number of people at it. This event, I guess, is dedicated to just debunking me. So there's some guy who I'd never heard of until like the last 5 minutes, who apparently runs a website that no one had heard of until he wrote a piece about me. So I am excited that I am a one-man stimulus package for academia. And I'm creating an entire cottage industry of useless people who now have found a use, and it's just yelling about things that I say, so that's exciting. I have heard also that this person is a socialist, so I hope that they're getting paid. I hope this guy's getting paid, and maybe he can be drawn into the great market that is the United States and maybe be cured of his foolishness. I do find it sort of amazing, by the way, that the left is so afraid of open conversation that they scheduled an event at the exact same time. And I think that they should totally have their event, and they should have their event yelling at me and all of that. That's great. But I would prefer that they actually come to this event, and then they can ask questions, because when we have the Q&A session, I have one simple rule. If you disagree with me, you raise your hand and you go to the front of the line. I prefer speaking with people with whom I disagree, not only because it makes for great internet fodder, but also because discussions are useful. I've spent my entire life in places like Los Angeles and Boston, places where no one agrees with me, literally no one agrees with me, and I have fun conversing about these views. I think it makes me sharper, it makes the person I'm talking to sharper, so everybody will have their shot, right? If you're on the left and you disagree with the stuff I'm about to say, then you'll have your opportunity. I just wish the college Democrats had participated in that rather than simply walking out, taking their ball, and going home like small children. And this is an upgrade, by the way, from what Antifa usually does. So I'm glad they're having an event and not trying to disrupt this one. I have a feeling that has to do with a couple of things. One, there's actually security. And two, it's really cold outside, and as a member of my security team told me, they are fair weather protesters. So apparently they wrote a letter to the student newspaper saying that I am a racist and ensconced in white identity politics, which is asinine. I've been one of the loudest critics of the alt-right in America for at least the last couple of years. I was the #1 target of the alt-right, according to the Anti-Defamation League. I received almost 8,000 tweets in a 6-month period that targeted me in anti-Semitic fashion, largely from the anti-Semitic alt-right. But apparently Antifa is upset, particularly because I, quote, overlook the need for ethnic studies and diversity-related education in the United States. That's fair. I mean, they should be angry. If we did away with useless college classes, how could they get easy A's that allow them to have jobs in useless professions at universities like this one? Now, make no mistake, I'm not saying that people of diverse backgrounds and orientations and races shouldn't be on this campus. They absolutely should. Everybody who's qualified should be on this campus, obviously. What I am suggesting is that if you are judging the quality of a group of people by the color of their skin, this makes you the racist, not me. And if you're looking at a group of people and you say this group of people is better than that group of people simply by dint of the variation in melanin, then you're doing something wrong. There's something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with me for suggesting there is something wrong with you if you are judging people simply by their group identity rather.
Hi, I'm Connor. I was just wondering, I agree with you that like biologically a man is a man and a woman is a woman. I was just wondering what you see the detriment of society, like why we can't like let a transgender like woman be called she or something.
Because it is a lie.
I agree.
Detrimental to society. So I think there are a couple of reasons. So yeah, sorry, you let him finish the question. That's fine.
No, I'm just wondering, what do you see? I understand it's lying. Like I was taught not to lie. I just don't understand what is so wrong about that specific lie.
Well, I mean, as opposed to other lies, I'm not sure there is anything wrong. I mean, I don't like all of them. But as far as that specific lie, I think that one of the problems that we have is this determination that men can become women and women can become men undermines some barriers between men and women that I think are useful and good, particularly in children. So if I have to teach my 3.5-year-old, right, she's almost 4, if I teach my almost 4-year-old girl that she can become a boy, then I think that is not only lying to her, I think it's confusing her, and I think it's damaging to her psyche. One of the premises of the transgender movement is that human minds are completely non-malleable. That oddly enough, men are not men and women are not women, but if you are transgender, that is unchangeable, and that especially among children, if a 3 or 4-year-old has certain feelings, those feelings have to be taken completely seriously. We can't fight against them. We can't suggest that the kid will grow out of it. Instead, we have to say that this kid is inherently transgender. I can tell you, having kids are incredibly malleable. Kids are easily confused. And saying to a child, which is what the transgender movement would like to do, I mean, they're having drag shows in kindergarten now in some areas. When you do that, when you confuse kids about gender, you're doing the kids no favors. You're doing them or you could be doing significant damage to kids. Kids should not be confused about their biology. Kids should not be confused about their gender. And let's put it this way, just from a certain statistical standpoint, if it is true that the transgender suicide attempt rate is 40% over the lifetime. And if I am right, then more kids will be confused about gender, which, by the way, you do see. You've seen an uptick in transgender surgery in Europe. You've seen a greater identification as transgender overall. In places like Europe, malleable rates of transgenderism in Europe. If that's the case, then you are raising the suicide rates, presumably, if there's an association, between for young people who are now confused about gender. So I am not in the mood for countenancing lies about what men and women are, specifically when I think that there is a goal of redefining a key term for the entire society.
Hi. So very much not a fan, but decided to come anyways.
Okay. It's like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. Yeah.
So I actually have 2 questions.
Right.
The first one is, how do you account for like statistical manipulation when you present your facts that you presented in the beginning? So more specifically, when you were talking about percentages of blacks in X, Y, and Z, and when you were talking about the differences in wages today versus 20 to 50 years ago, how do you account for A, the difference in population among blacks versus whites or other races, and B, how do you account for the increasing gap between the middle class and the upper class?
Okay, so, sorry, 2 things. There are 2 questions there. On any given statistic, I would bet we'd have a more productive conversation if I could actually give you the source. You could look up the source, and then you could ask specific questions about how those numbers were arrived at, because I'm giving you the bottom line, but I'm happy to give you the footnotes. I typically don't do that because it makes the speech even longer and more boring than it already is. But I'm more than happy to argue the stats and whether they're good or not, because it might be like that other guy questioning the Bureau of Justice Statistics stats. Right? There might be a flaw in the stat, and then we can argue about that. So that's a good question. The answer is we'll look at each individual stat, and we'll determine whether we think that it's reflective of reality or not based on its internal logic. As far as the idea that how do I account for the gap between the upper class and the non-upper class, as I said, number one, it's not the same people in the upper class, right? People move up and down between classes fairly regularly in the United States. There is a widening gap in terms of the people who are earning the most and the people who are earning the least, but that's because if you had to make a chart, it wouldn't look like this. It wouldn't look like the people at the top are going like that and people at the bottom are going like that. It would look like this, right? People at the bottom are moving up slightly, and the people at the top are moving up rapidly. That's because investment income has done really well under the stock market, for example. So if you had money to put in the stock market, that's been doing really well for you over the past several years, which suggests that one of the ways that you get out of poverty is to save and then get into the stock market. Right? The point here is that when people focus on income inequality, I think that this is actually a rather large moral mistake. I think that focusing on poverty is a good thing to do. I think focusing on income inequality is not a good thing to do because there's no correlation between income inequality and relative rates of poverty. Right? There's tremendous income inequality in a lot of places on planet Earth. In fact, in all places on planet Earth. If you go to Sudan, there's going to be a rich warlord there, and then there are going to be a bunch of people living on $6 a year. Okay, that's a terrible place to live. Income inequality in the United States is also quite high, right? There are people who are Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, and then there's the local checker at your grocery store. But if the local checker at your grocery store is getting richer, then it seems to me they have nothing particularly to complain about in how the economy is operating.